Okay. All right, let's get into it. Week 15 of the Arc Academy for Qlik weekly workshop, week 5 of the strategy series. Today, we're going to talk about performance and scalability. Again, this week, we're tying everything into the strategy component of this. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about the calculation approach, where to put your calculations, whether that's in the back end, whether it's in the front end, what part of the back end, do you put it in a separate QVT loader? Is it in a data model? Does it move to a data flow? There's a lot of things to consider here, and we're going to talk about a couple things, both on the Qlik Sense perspective and Qlik Cloud perspective, what's the same, what's different, and we're really going to talk about things at a high level today. We're not going to get into the weeds on these things, but these are things to be aware of. So as you've completed kind of your, intermediate journey, you've got a little bit of an understanding about what Qlik can do, its capabilities, you've used it a little bit, and then now you're moving into the strategy. You're starting to kind of plan it, right? You've made your proof of concept, you've used some Excel workbooks. Now we're starting to make connections. We're starting to plan into a pipeline, start to create those enterprise flows. So jumping on into it. So the biggest thing, we talked about this before, why performance matters. The biggest thing that's going to matter is it's the user experience. And Qlik used to advertise this a lot. It's the speed of thought. When you're using an in-memory tool, the best part about it is clicking around, making those selections on the fly, getting those selections, getting new insights, having that data just move at the touch of your fingertips, right? So it's the speed of thought. That speed and experience and the user experience is all part of it. And what we talk about speed is not just from a performance standpoint, not just from taxing the resources, it's the adoption aspect. If I go to a website every single day and it's slow, am I going to use that website? Absolutely not. Same thing with your phone and your everyday household devices. You probably find yourself, whether you realize it or not, gravitating towards your devices that perform better. That's why people slowly start putting things in the drawer. They put that old iPad away. They don't touch it again because something that is slow and bogged down and does not have a great user experience anymore, once it becomes outdated, if you got to twist the cord a certain way to start getting it to work, you're probably not going to be using it. So speed leads to more adoption. Lower speed, more clunky apps kind of lead to people, not using your product and then using something else. And then part of that, kind of as a daisy chain into that, performance and speed and user experience, that all leads to trust. That leads to trust in your data. How timely is it? It leads to trust in, your team and your resources, how good the tool is actually displaying the information. If everything is breaking all the time and it's super finicky and you're having trouble with it, why would you have any confidence that the data is correct in itself? If it was wrong yesterday and it's right today and it's wrong again tomorrow, it's probably a good place to start reevaluating where, these performance really matter. So that's something to keep in mind as we kind of talk about this, is performance is not just about the nuts and bolts and the ones and zeros and how much we're getting charged on AWS credits and all that. It comes down to how much can your users trust your data and how much will your users use the dashboards and the pipelines and the tools and solutions that you put in place. Because with Qlik, and especially here at ARC, we're not building reports, we're building capabilities. So you'll hear me say that a lot. Moving on. All right, I tried to throw in some random screenshots into these before we get into the fun stuff, but where the performance issues come from, and we talked about this before in calculation workshop, but they come from poor data models primarily. The actual app performance, the number one telltale sign is someone didn't know what they were doing. They loaded a bunch of tables in, they made a bunch of synthetic keys, and now it's super slow. Or they didn't add any where clauses, they didn't do any modeling, they didn't add correct keying, whatever it is, it's a bad data model, right? Or it's pulling directly from data sources that doesn't need to be. It's not using KVDs and stuff like that. So number one thing we see is a bad data model. Number two is extra data that you loaded in. See this a lot with these huge data models, all these extra tables, island tables, variables. Drop the tables. It's one thing to actually pull the data in. Sure, there's some fields you need for calculations, for calculating things out, for doing the join over to their table, for letting it get over there to add a key value. Drop the tables. Drop the values. Drop if you're not using it in the front end, drop it. We'll talk about some ways to identify those in bulk, but really, if you're not using it, you're paying for it one way or another. You're paying for it in the performance of the application, you're paying for it on the data analyze component, and you're paying a fractional share. I mean, you're also paying for it in terms of the amount of clarity that you lose with the user. Third thing is the front end calculations. This kind of goes hand in hand with some of the extra data, but putting all of your expressions in the front end is a really quick way to make an app slow, especially if you're adding buttons that already do what Qlik is designed to do. If you're adding buttons to clear filters, you're adding every object you're adding to that sheet is another item for Qlik to recalculate on the canvas every single time someone makes a selection. So every object, think about that. The simplicity, it's like Occam's razor. Sometimes simplicity is key. Then the last kind of thing we see here is the inefficient expression. So this is an example where it could be front end, it can be a combination of front end and back end, but the back end example might be doing this huge nested if statement. If this equals that, if A equals B, if X equals Y. And you got this crazy nested if statement, right? See that a lot with junior devs when really you could do things like a pick match or a mapping table and can really get creative with some better formula structure. So that's the 4 things we typically see in performance issues, and kind of we're going to talk about some ways to remediate them and things to put on your radar, whether you have Qlik Sense or whether you have Qlik Cloud or whether you're just doing the migration, kind of evaluating both. So let's look at that. On the Qlik Sense side, we have a couple options here. And I like to highlight these. I put them in the parentheses as free and premium. First thing is the scalability tools. Again, this is just one example here where in Qlik Sense, you have a set of scalability tools that is at your disposal. You can essentially simulate traffic onto an app. And this is not actually testing how well the app is built or something like that, but it does simulate how well your environment is going to handle it. And this can be helpful for a number of reasons, whether they're public facing apps, whether you just, need to check how well your infrastructure is going to handle that kind of load of concurrent users. So if you see in the screenshot, it does have ways where you can simulate the number of users and things like that. So that's kind of a free example of how you can kind of simulate extra traffic. A more premium example in the Qlik Sense ecosystem is something called QSDA Pro. It's a premium product that I've had the privilege of using a couple times on a previous contract, and it's a pretty slick tool. It allows you to actually evaluate the app conditions for having null fields, having blank fields, and kind of some of those things we talked about with having extra data sitting in the data model and kind of creating those preemptive flags. And you can script a lot of this stuff into an app, kind of do these checks and balances, but this tool is really nice. It does kind of do that stuff for you. We are not sponsored by QSDA, so shameless plug there, but good tool, and shout out to the team that supports that. Moving into Qlik Cloud, you have some built-in options. Here's an example directly out of Qlik Cloud. Stole the screenshot where it lets you kind of evaluate some of the things that QSDA Pro is doing on Qlik Sense, but it lets you actually evaluate the calculation time and things like that. So a lot of overlap between those tools, and this is one of the benefits too you're going to get by going from a tool like Qlik Sense up to the cloud. You're going to be getting some of those monitoring capabilities where you're going to be able to expand that out and get your script automatically evaluated for review. So that's pretty much in a nutshell some of the kind of strategy around scalability here and performance. I'm going to pass it over to Austin. We're going to just kind of talk through this a little bit more so that whether you're a beginner, whether you're an intermediate, still kind of aligning with Qlik here, as you start to plan your enterprise approach, get a little bit closer along the way to planning for large sets of users, planning for big databases, and planning for things under heavy load.
Great. So when we're thinking about performance and scalability in Qlik Cloud and how to have a good strategy when we approach those things, it's important to really hone in on how much data you are bringing into your environment. That's really the name of the game. It's just how much data you're bringing in, how that data is getting used. And so when we're thinking about our Qlik applications that we are wanting to create in Qlik Cloud, we need to evaluate, number one, is it how much data do we need in order to solve the business problem that this dashboard is addressing, right? Or help us find the insights that this dashboard is supposed to lead us to. Now, if this is a situation where you have a lot of data that is required, where it's a number of different sources, multiple millions of records of data, you have to evaluate a number of things in order to really optimize how you're using your Qlik environment and what these apps are doing, including, does it need to be a single application? Can you split that one app into multiple logical apps where the data can be loaded separately, and far fewer records are needed for a single application, where if you try and load that app or open it up, the end user might experience lag or just some general slowness from the amount of information in there. You also need to think about if you need all of that data loaded at once. Because when you have all the data in your application at once, it creates that large data model that is, again, going to create that slowness if there's too much information. You might need to think about being able to query the data from a database directly, right? So it's this idea of, do I need all of it at once, or can I go to the data source and get only the data I need when a user is using the application? So sort of directly querying data when needed. So that's obviously that situation. When you have a lot of information, directly querying it from the source is going to be much quicker and put less strain on your application and not cause as much lagginess. And so the trade-offs therein need to be evaluated, but that can really help mitigate the amount of information that you load in all at once. And apart from that, any applications that already exist in your environment, it's really good to go in and have a strategy for certifying that those applications are built to a high standard, including that load script, right? And this is something that we've gone over in previous weekly workshops, where that load script really needs to be optimized to use all of those sort of optimization functions like auto number and hashing to make sure your data values don't get too large, reducing the precision of geometric or date time values so that they don't take up as much room in your data model. So utilizing those strategies to make sure that your scripts are really tight, really efficient, don't load more than they need, right? Because any amount of data that you load that is not being used is just going to add some lagginess and some cruft to the application that it doesn't need, right? So now, how do you find those applications that are bogging down the system? One of the many really important tools that you get in Qlik Cloud is the ability to do performance evaluations, which I have pulled up on my screen here. This is an application that we have. We can see the size of it, the number of rows of data that are in the data model, the number of objects or charts, tables, images that the application includes. And I can actually view that report and see if this had any sort of issues or errors. I would see that in this list here, where it's going to tell me if there are certain fields that I'm loading in a table that are really large. I can find those and be able to hone in on that in the data model and maybe remove that field or use one of my optimization functions to use on that. I can also see results and just have it break down every little thing about what might be causing problems or slowness, including individual charts, including if there are certain charts that use an excessive amount of information or memory. That can help me find charts that maybe were made incorrectly and were not meant to be really slow and laggy, but are. These are one of those tools that are going to help you surface um, issues with your data and issues with the front end, the charts and the visualizations. And by utilizing a strategy of maybe going in and on a regular basis, going through these apps and evaluating them and surfacing these problems, that's going to help you regularly pare down too much data, inefficient scripts, and poorly made designs in your dashboard, dashboards that are going to cause lagginess to the front end users. And this is just something that you can have on a cadence that will allow you to mitigate those issues or get rid of those issues.